What is up, everybody? It's the Vish Kumaran show. We are here for, I think, episode 28. So it's been quite a journey through this football season. And we're back for our usual Tuesday. I would like to call it our Tuesday hit, but sometimes it's turned into our only hit of the week. But it's our opportunity to talk to the legend of 49ers radio and 49ers coverage in general. Look at him looking around, but he knows we're talking about him. What's up, Larry Krueger? How we doing?
What is going on, Vish? Happy Tuesday, my friend. How's things going?
Wow. I had a long day at work. I was kind of in a conference, I had a lot of meetings, but hearing that energy from you, Larry, I'm ready to go right now.
Dude, I'm
Tomorrow
feeling
to
good.
me is the
I'm feeling
most
good.
important day of the 49ers offseason.
Huge day tomorrow for the 49ers because Brock Purdy will be having his surgery, and we're going to find out. It's either 6 months and he'll be ready for week one, prior to week one in September, or worst case scenario, he could be out longer, maybe until November. And that
Right.
would shake up things dramatically in Ninerland.
Yeah, and to me, basically, kind of the length we figure out, right, with him is going to kind of define how aggressive the Niners are, what they do in free agency, kind of who they go for at the quarterback position. To me, so much is contingent on knowing the health of him. And we know you have a special affinity for Brock Purdy. You were ahead of the curve, as most like to say, on Brock Purdy. Do you have any thoughts? Obviously, you're not a medical professional, but, what are your thoughts kind of here looking forward at this surgery? Kind of how do you expect it to affect the offseason for the 49ers?
Well, okay, first of all, I wouldn't expect necessarily news tomorrow, right? The surgery will happen tomorrow, but we may not get news exactly on the timeline until, could be after the surgery. I mean, I expect maybe something tomorrow, but I wouldn't bank on it. The other thing is you got to remember, I mean, I think it's hard to kind of understand exactly how much of the football season he would miss if it's not the 6-month timeline, if it's something greater. But they're saying maybe late November as a possible return date if by chance, he needs a more extensive procedure. Late November this year was week 12 against New Orleans. And that
Right.
means that, that was basically between week 12, week 13. So you had Miami, Tampa, Seattle, Washington, Las Vegas, Arizona. So you had 6 games left. So it's possible that Brock Purdy could be out until basically the stretch run of next year, which definitely impacts how I would want to look at that quarterback room going forward. But I'm not sure if it does. That's another thing we need to talk about. It's like, does the quarterback that you're interested in rounding out the room with, does it change if the prognosis tomorrow or in the coming days changes from a 6-month rehab to a 9-month rehab? It could, but it may not, depending on, what avenue they want to go as far as picking up another quarterback. They may not go with the veteran quarterback, even if he's going to be out an extended period of time, knowing that Trey Lance is their one and Brock eventually will be there too. So it's going to be interesting. I think it's going to be really interesting too, also, Vish, from the standpoint of how do you attract a veteran free agent quarterback to your situation when you have Trey Lance and Brock Purdy? It's like basically you're saying to that veteran, do you want a ton of upheaval in your life? Because you're going to come here, you're going to sit, you may play, you may not play. And then you may be checking out free agency again next year after having not played. Odds are against it, but it's possible. So I don't know what caliber of third quarterback they even could attract.
Yeah, and so let's start with our conversation there because you're absolutely right in a lot of ways. I think I agree with you. It's just financially where the 49ers are. I think regardless of what happens tomorrow, they do have to find some sort of veteran quarterback that threads that beautiful needle the way Nate Sudfeld did, in the sense that he's not going to discredit, Trey Lance or Brock Purdy by making more than them or coming in with more experience or more talent or more cachet or more production than them. But he has to be good enough in the sense that, oh my God, if we get desperate and everything goes wrong, he has to be able to play just a little bit. And so they're going to have to thread that needle financially, to me, no matter what, just because of where they are in terms of their cap situation and the number that they need to invest in the quarterback position next year. Now, to me, if Brock Purdy, we get the 9-month number, which is the worst case scenario, and we don't know what it's going to be. So I think the worst case scenario is worth to be talking about. To me, that changes the entire conversation of everything, Larry, because I think if we hit the 9 months, and I don't know how you feel about it, but if we're talking about a late November return for Brock Purdy, it becomes hard for me to imagine him getting integrated into the fold in the 2024-3 season at all for the 49ers, unless it's a disaster. If it's a disaster, I can see them then slowly integrating Brock Purdy back and seeing what they have in Purdy, who looked fantastic in 2022, and seeing what they have in 2024. But if it goes as how we all think the 49ers season is supposed to go, which means we think they'll win the NFC West again, and we think that they'll be one of the best teams in the NFC again, even if Trey Lance's play is up and down, it's hard for me to see them, try to integrate mid-season, that late into the season, a guy, as well as he played in 2022, that's coming off of that serious of an injury and that serious of a surgery. So to me, the best case, if they have the 9-month surgery, is that, like you said, Brock Purdy returns as the backup. And what do you think of that quarterback situation in that scenario? What do you kind of think happens if he's out for 9 months? I do think, Larry, the last time we got to listen to Lynch and Shanahan, which was the end of season presser, that we got to hear that Shanahan was, of course, a little bit feisty. And I really got the impression that Lynch and Shanahan both were basing everything they talked about on the fact that they were confident Brock Purdy was going to come back in 6 months. He's going to come back in training camp, and he was going to be what he had earned by his play in 2022, which is the starting quarterback of the 49ers. Now, Brock Purdy, to me, didn't seem so sure given the nature of the surgery. He seemed like, well, let's see what happens when I do get my surgery, because the surgeon could call an audible, and obviously the surgeon and Brock Purdy have to do what's best for Brock Purdy's elbow. But what do you think kind of happens in that scenario? Because I don't know if the Niners are obviously prepared for that scenario, but it's obviously worst case kind of doomsday for the Niners, given that they have some level of belief in both of these players, and they're both so cheap, if Brock Purdy's out for 9 months.
Well, it's the ultimate question. I think you have to proceed with the idea that you want Trey to become the quarterback. But I think when in sports, I think when you don't know, always side with competition, right? Create a competitive room. If you told me Fred Warner was out for the year, what would I want to do with the linebacker room? I'd want to add talent and add competition, and then just see how it goes. And I think I would do the same thing here. And I would try to add talent and add competition, because the reality is that Trey may beat out that quarterback and become the guy. But, if you're still about, going to the playoffs and winning a Super Bowl, and I got to think they are, you got to have another quarterback besides Trey and besides Brock, if Brock's going to be out till late November. So what does that mean? What caliber of quarterback is it? Can you find it in the free agent market? I would say probably not. I think you might have to make a trade. So, there's that factor as well. And as far as, if you go the free agent market, forget the high price guys, right? Derek Carr, forget him. Obviously Jimmy's moving on. I think Bridgewater's too expensive. Daniel Jones, too expensive. Geno Smith, too expensive. I'd even say probably guys like Andy Dalton are too expensive.
I agree with that.
So in the free agent market, what's the best they can do realistically as a third quarterback? I'll give you a couple names. CJ Beathard, who obviously would be coming back, and that would be not very popular, but at least he knows the system. Um, he would be one guy that I would have interest in. And probably the other guy I would have interest in would be Jarrett Stidham
Mm-hmm.
from the Raiders, who clearly don't seem to either don't like Stidham that much or just clear are dead set on upgrading. And
Right.
Easton Stick would be the third free agent I would look at. Those are the three guys I think I would have interest in free agency: Stick, Jarrett Stidham, and possibly CJ Beathard. But I mean, none of those guys I think are really good options if you had to, I mean, Stidham would probably be the best option if you had to start him. But can you win enough games to qualify for the playoffs with Jarrett Stidham? I don't know about that. So then it comes down to what's available in the trade market. And it could be a very interesting trade market. Are the Bears going to go quarterback at the top of the draft? If they are, is Justin Fields available? Um, are the Lions going to look for their quarterback in the future? And if so, is Jared Goff available? Is Atlanta really going with Desmond Ritter? And if so, is Marcus Mariota available? Are the Jets going to get Aaron Rodgers or Derek Carr? And if so, is Zach Wilson available? I mean, some of
Right.
these things have to be fleshed out. But, is Houston going to wind up with a top tier quarterback at the top of the draft and Davis Mills is available? So I think you're going to have to kind of have an open mind about your quarterback position. But to me, the trade route is far more attractive than the free agent route.
And I kind of agree with you. The one name I thought you missed that Scotch brought up is Brett Rippon, right? He would fit the mold. But I think that the issue that the 49ers kind of have right now is that if he and look, we are under the guise that we don't know. Obviously, we don't know. But let's say Brock Purdy's out for 9 months. The Niners still need, two quarterbacks capable of starting. It's not that you don't believe in Trey Lance necessarily, but at the same time, with a team this good, you can't take all your chances on a complete unknown. You have to give yourself some level of, hey, if it doesn't work out, we can fall back on this, but we think it's going to work out. That kind of level, because you just don't know with Trey Lance. And when you're in that sort of a situation, Larry, I'm completely with you because the Niners are also financially strapped. And there is this financial situation where the guy that comes in, right, can't make more money. And well, he's going to make more money than Brock Purdy, likely, just given the nature of the situation. But he can't make so much money that he completely discredits the credibility of the fact that you are looking for one of these two guys to become the starter and not whoever comes in. Whoever comes in is solely a veteran support and kind of a, oh my God, if the guy gets hurt or if he's not playing well, we can fall back on you and we think we can kind of win games with you. And like you mentioned, I think Brett Rippon kind of fits that role. But again, he might be maybe not good enough. It might be kind of in the Beathard range with that level of quarterback. I know the Niners might like Beathard back. Kyle Shanahan adores CJ Beathard. He adores his toughness. But I'm kind of with you. I do think trade is where the 49ers can likely find this guy that perfectly threads this needle, because I think even in free agency, a lot of the names that you mentioned, like to me, Andy Dalton, the last 2 years, like I don't think Andy Dalton's going to sign with San Francisco for the league minimum or 1 million guaranteed or something like that. And when you're in this sort of a situation, I do think it's interesting. And that's why I think tomorrow is so important, Larry. I think that we have not hyped up tomorrow enough. In fact, as a community, tomorrow will define the 49ers offseason. The outcome of tomorrow is going to be everything. Because if he's out only 6 months, Larry, then the way he played in 2022, I don't care, kind of really. It just turns into when he comes back, if he's fully healthy, he will go to the season as the starter and you will figure it out from there. But if he's out 9 months, Larry, now you have an unknown on who your starting quarterback is. You think it's going to be Trey Lance, but he's returning from injury and he is still an unknown for you. And then everything else from there is I'm not sure. SF Gold Rush says the surgery got delayed. It's not happening tomorrow. Did I miss something, Larry? Do you know that it's not happening tomorrow?
No, let's see. I saw an article that came out on the 21st, so that was today, and it said that he was undergoing surgery on Wednesday.
Okay, so yeah, I don't know
So
what
if
SF
there's
Gold Rush is
anything,
talking about.
yeah, if there's anything new out there, I haven't seen it.
Isaac
But
Pajas is saying Lance ain't it. The issue with this conversation, and you have a lot to say, Larry, so I would like to switch it over to you. But I hate this extreme reaction, right? Immediately, if you mention, hey, we're not sure, it means he's not it. But the problem isn't whether he is it or whether he isn't it. The problem is that we aren't sure whether he is or isn't it. And the 49ers, given how good the roster is, can't afford to take the chance on if he is in it. So they have to hedge their bet in some way. It doesn't necessarily mean it's an indictment on Trey Lance. It's just a general assessment of where the situation is. He very well could be it. We don't know. But when we do find out, Larry, we can't afford to take the chance of just finding out without having another option, if that makes sense to you. And what do you think of that? And what do you think of this entire situation?
okay, I think the Niners have an incredible opportunity. Why? Because most teams pay a lot of money for their quarterback room, and they don't. Jimmy's leaving. The two quarterbacks they have make nothing. They're both on rookie contracts. This is a unique situation. And it's also a unique situation that hurts the Niners because they're both young and some unproven. But the part that helps the Niners is that nobody makes money, so you potentially can have, you know, you've got a lot of different options. Personally, I think the 49ers still need. I think after watching this year, if I was giving any advice, I would say make sure that every quarterback on your team is somebody that you believe can win you games because they may have to. And that's reality. And especially if you're starting with Brock basically on, starting the season on IR, then you absolutely need somebody who can play. But I think I would also want somebody who could play who's young and not making a lot of money. So, I would look around the league and try to make a trade. I mean, Marcus Mariota makes a lot of sense to me.
Oh gosh, Larry,
I
please
love the
don't
way
start there
Mariota played
again.
against the Niners. I really do. But, if the Jets are sick of Zach Wilson, I'd give him a stop. I'd give him a second chance here. If Davis Mills is out there, I'd give him a chance. And I wouldn't be afraid to go with a rookie if you like Tanner McKee, if you like Jake Hayner, if you believe in one of the quarterbacks, Clayton Tune from Houston's impressive to me. So I think that's the route I would go. I mean, the free agents, I don't know. To me, I don't know about those guys. I don't know about any of them. Beathard, I really think probably can't play. Easton Stick, I think would make Trey happy, but I'm not sure if that's the goal. Stidham, I think is good enough to play, but man, he hasn't played very much, and who knows exactly what he would look like. I don't know. I mean, I like some of those young quarterbacks around the league, and I think you got to, I'd rather kind of proceed like you don't have the answer at quarterback and go invest in a trade in a young quarterback that you like, and then if things don't work out with Brock, if things don't work out with Trey, at least you got another young quarterback who you like. To me, there's two ways to go about winning the Super Bowl. You got to have a franchise quarterback to do it. And so if you don't know if you have a franchise quarterback, you need to keep bringing in new quarterbacks until you find your franchise quarterback.
And I 100% agree with you. And that last point to me is so important, right? Because John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan take a lot of criticism. In some ways, rightfully so. In some ways, a little bit result oriented and maybe not as much evaluation of the process for, the number of times they've mishandled the quarterback situation with San Francisco. But to me, the one thing they've gotten right, and they've gotten it right more than most teams, is if you don't have that special franchise guy that you look at as, hey, he's going to uplift everybody, he's the most special guy, maybe not Mahomes, but one of those Burrow, Allen's, one of those franchise guys, you have to keep turning over every stone and cracking every window and trying to find a way to find that guy. And the 49ers, for all the mistakes they've made at the quarterback position, some and some that are completely egregious, like not scouting Patrick Mahomes, and then some are a little bit overstated sometimes in terms of the mistake, right? Like they missed on Brady, but then you also understand in some ways Garoppolo was coming off of a Super Bowl and the difficulty of the dynamic to move off of him at the time too. But when you throw in all of those variables, to me the one thing they've gotten right is that they've continued to analyze the quarterback situation and try and improve it. Now, Larry, we have some breaking news here.
Yeah.
Tom Pelissero tweeted 15 minutes ago that Brock Purdy visited Dr. Keith Meister, who's obviously, has every accolade that a medical professional can have.
Right.
And he recommended postponing the surgery because of ongoing inflammation in Purdy's elbow, per sources. They'll reconvene in early March. Now, the one thing SF Gold Rush missed in this tweet is Pelissero also noted at the end that all signs continue to point a UCL repair that would have Purdy ready for the 2023 season. So there's two bombshells to me in this. One is the delay, which means, there's something that's causing this surgery to be delayed. I know everybody likes to go big deal, no big deal. It's not a right situation. I'm not going to pretend to be a medical professional and evaluate what's right or wrong with this elbow. All I know is that something is not perfect because they scheduled this surgery for tomorrow and now it's getting delayed. Now, the second part of it is the confidence factor, which kind of negates, I guess, the early part of this conversation, which to me is so important, in the fact that the 49ers or whomever told Pelissero about this report told Pelissero that they believe that no, it's going to be the UCL repair still. And they have that confidence. And so that's a lot to take in, obviously, on the fly here, Larry. This is some actually very large news if we think about it in the landscape of the 49ers offseason. What are your initial thoughts here? Do you think it changes the conversation we just had? And how do you think this affects the timeline for Purdy going forward, right? Because the timeline was already a little bit suspect to me, right? End of February surgery. They were saying he was going to be ready for the start of camp, which doesn't exactly fit into the 6 months timeline because it's about 5 months. Now this surgery is going to be delayed further into March when they're going to reconvene. 6 months from there actually puts him into August. The season starts in September. So how do you think this all relates? I know I'm putting you on the spot here and asking you questions that you may not have the answer to, but Larry, talk to me.
Well, okay, a couple things. One, if you push the surgery back a few weeks, even if it's a 6-month deal, week 1 is still very much in question.
Right.
So even if if you push the surgery back and it still goes according to plan and it's a 6-month rehab, you're still looking at the middle of the preseason, probably before he's ready to roll. And he may not be ready to roll in week 1. And that's that's the good scenario.
Right.
The bad scenario means he may not be ready until Christmas, which you might be out of the playoff picture by then. And also you heard kind of Kyle talk about Trey. He kind of made it seem like Trey has a hard time staying healthy, which a lot of people would really aggressively push back on him and say, Kyle, you're the reason that he couldn't stay healthy. Your utilization of him got him hurt. And there are a lot of people that believe that. So I will say this, great piece today by Kyle Posey on Niners Nation's website.
Friend of the show, by the way. Good friend of the show.
Great guy. I love Kyle Posey. This is a fact that he had in one of his articles today, and he's got a bunch of stuff up. I would encourage everybody to check it out. 41 different NFL quarterbacks took at least 20% of their team's dropbacks this season. 41 different players played 20% of the time. So what does that tell you? Tells me that it's the most important position on first of all, we already know it is the most important position on the field, and defenses are smaller and faster, and pass rush is more diversified, coming from different areas, smaller guys. And the reality is that it's hard to keep a quarterback upright through the entire season. And after watching the 49ers literally run out of quarterbacks in a crucial, biggest game of the year scenario, I don't want to skimp on the quarterback position. I want the 3 best either prospects or players that I can find. And I'm not worried about feelings, and I'm not worried about how it all blends, or if they're giving each other side looks. I don't care. I'm not going to sit there and look. I'm going to look Trent Williams in the eye, and I'm going to say, "Hey, big boy, I'm going to try to get you the ring this year, and I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure that happens." And everything in my power means everybody who's in our
Right.
quarterback room can win us playoff games, or at
Right.
least we believe in as guys that we could go with as our number one. So I think that every year in football, I think you got to change your thinking a little bit. Nothing stays the same. Everything evolves. I'd like to see Kyle go for it more on 4th down. I'd like to see the Niners steal what the Eagles did as far as their rugby scrum short yardage play. And I think what we ought to take away as our lesson to be learned here is that every quarterback on your roster may have to lead you to the Super Bowl. So get every guy on that roster to be somebody you believe in enough that you feel like if they were in there, it's all systems go. There's no reason. I'd rather just go with 2 quarterbacks and have an extra wide receiver, an extra D tackle, an extra D end, an extra corner. I'd rather use that spot on somebody else if my 3rd guy can't win me games, or if my 3rd guy can't even get plays called on time, or my 3rd guy just means I automatically lose. You have to be able to win with all your quarterbacks. And that would be, I know that's not the old philosophy. The old philosophy, Vish, was, hey, man, when I talked about Brock Purdy this summer, most of the response I got? Hey, man, if they're down to their 3rd quarterback, they're screwed anyway. No,
Right.
that's old school loser thinking from yesteryear. If you want to win the Super Bowl, you have to be able to win it with multiple quarterbacks, because the Niners might have been able to beat the Eagles if they had another quarterback who they really believed in. They didn't.
Right.
They lost. But it's a violent game. These guys go down. You're going to use more than one. The idea of Tom Brady went 8 years without missing a game, that ain't reality, man. That's just not the way. I don't think that's reality going forward. I think that's the aberration. That's the exception. It's not the rule. Give me 3 quarterbacks and give me a competition. And I want a competition that starts in minicamp, and I want that competition to end when the season ends. I don't want a competition for a week or a month. I want a competition the entire season. That's what everybody else on this team does. Every other guy on this team competes for their role every single week. The quarterback should not be, in a different category.
I actually agree with the premise a lot. To me, I think that with the rookie wage and how unreasonable a lot of these contracts and quarterback contract asks have become, we've gone into this situation where I think the quarterback position has basically become a value proposition. Basically, if I have Mahomes, or if I have any of the 3 guys that I would say can be as good as Mahomes on any given game, they're not Mahomes in terms of consistency, in terms of ceiling, anything like that, but they can maybe compete with Mahomes head to head, and that's who I would say: Allen, Herbert, maybe Lamar Jackson, and Joe Burrow. Those are the only guys I would put in that category. I feel like besides that, you kind of got to moneyball the quarterback situation a little bit. You got to find these younger, cheap guys and see what you can get out of it. Now, where I kind of push back on you, Larry, is I don't necessarily look at it as, so you think, and let me just ask you this straight up: do you think that now we've turned into a time in the NFL where there won't be these franchise quarterbacks that have repetitive starts over a large number of years? Because I've seen Kirk Cousins start year after year without getting hurt. I mean, Derek Carr has missed how many starts over the last year since he broke his leg? Patrick Mahomes, he had the 1 year of injury, year 2, but how many starts has he missed? Josh Allen hasn't missed a lot of starts since he came into the NFL. So to me, Larry, it feels like while the quarterback is getting injured more, and I agree with that, and we talked about that on your show, by the way, Krug Show. Make sure you're subscribed and following. I think Larry is on his way to 15K, maybe 16K, maybe we'll just say 20K, because the channel is growing so fast. But make sure you're subscribed there. But the point is, we're seeing, we talked about this, right? The line play, the offensive line play is terrible across the NFL, right? We always hear this with the 49ers. Oh, their offensive line sucks. Upgrade the offensive line. Well, guess what? Their offensive line is top 10 in the league. Guess what? It's top 10 in the league because the offensive line play across the NFL sucks. Offensive linemen coming into the NFL suck. And so, because of that, and because of how good defensive line talent is, we're seeing quarterback injuries increase. But I still think that the top guys, Larry, whether we talk about the Mahomes, the Josh Allens, the Joe Burrows, the Justin Herberts, I think these guys are going to find a way to start every Sunday because in my lifetime, through eras, I feel like I've lived through kind of different iterations of the NFL now, though I'm still very young and I've only seen so much football, especially compared to you. Not to age you, Larry, you're still looking very young.
Thank
I
you.
still think that the best quarterbacks in the NFL, Larry, will find ways to start game after game because that's just what they do. And we've become accustomed to that in my lifetime. And until I see the Mahomes miss multiple starts over multiple years, I'm not necessarily going to subscribe to that because to me, a trait and skill is a quarterback protecting himself. We watch Tom Brady even at 45. You want to see a quarterback protect himself? Watch Tom Brady when there's a free rusher. He deads the play. He turns his back. And we say, well, Tom Brady doesn't want to take a hit anymore. Tom Brady will tell you he doesn't want to take a hit anymore. Guess what? Tom Brady still starts 17 games every single season. So the best quarterbacks in the NFL still find a way to protect themselves, whether it's with their movement like Mahomes, whether it's with their brain like Brady. They find a way to protect themselves, Larry. And as bad as the line play is, as bad as the protection is, as good as the pass rush is, as good as these edge players and interior defensive players are, because they really are special in the NFL. Just about every team has two guys that you say, you turn on the film every week and you go, whoa, that guy can wreck the game from the defensive line. That's how good defensive line plays across the NFL. Regardless of that, I disagree with you there, Larry. I think the top quarterbacks, if you find a way to get a top quarterback, they find a way to stay healthy and play.
Well, let me ask you this: do you own a home?
Yes.
You
no,
do?
no, I don't. My parents own a home.
Okay, they own a home.
Yes.
You understand the concept of homeowners insurance.
Yes.
I'd rather have homeowners insurance and not need it than need it and not have it. That's really all we're talking
That's
about.
fair enough. Yeah, you're absolutely
That's
right.
all we're talking about. Would you rather have insurance and not need it, or would you rather need it and not have it? It's two ways of thinking. I mean, yeah, you
Let
could
me
save
ask
a
you
few
this,
bucks.
though.
You could see.
Let me
You know
ask
what?
you this, though, Larry.
I might save $150 every month if I just didn't have homeowners insurance. Who's going to break into my house? I live in a safe neighborhood. Fires don't start in my house. I unplug everything every time I walk out. You know, I have no real reason to waste 180 or $200 a month on homeowners insurance unless I need homeowners insurance. And then I'm glad that I have it. So
but
I
how
think
are
the
you going to get it,
49ers ought
right?
to be fresh in their mind that they needed quarterback insurance more than they had last year. And how disgusting was that? I mean, the 49ers got to the NFC Championship game, one game away from the pinnacle of the sport. Jed York and the DeBartolos and the Yorks have been chasing down this thing since the mid 90s, talking about 3 decades looking for that 6th ring. To me, I'm building the best and strongest football team I can.
I completely
and
disagree with this,
I don't
Larry.
feel like I know what I have in Trey Lance, and I only feel marginally better what I have with Brock Purdy. So I even if these guys were healthy, I think I would want a really good third quarterback. And you know what? I would say to Brock and to Trey and to this third quarterback, ain't nothing promised, baby. This is the NFL. That stands for not for long. You can either do it or you can't, and don't be afraid to compete. If you don't want to compete, there's the door. And take it. You know what I mean? Because I'm gonna bring in the best guys possible, and I'm gonna have an open competition. And maybe I'll bring in a quarterback that's good enough to beat you out, Brock. Maybe I'll bring in a quarterback that absolutely puts you on the bench, Trey. But guess what? If you're not good enough to beat him, then you don't deserve to play. Well, this is big boy football, and I'm after the ring. So if you can hang with it, stick. If you can't, bail. But that's the way I would do it. I'm not taking any more. I'm not banking on guys who haven't been hurt, haven't been healthy to be healthy. And I'm
Larry,
not going to ignore a trend where the league is clearly, every 16 teams in the league used 3 quarterbacks this year. 41 different quarterbacks took 20% of the snaps. That's a boatload
Larry,
of quarterbacks. I'm not getting
here's
caught short there again.
here's where I disagree, though. I agree with your last point,
I
right?
don't care about feelings.
I agree with your last point. You don't care about feelings. We got to find the best guy there, that no matter what goes on this season, we got to find a way to win the Super Bowl. And now, while I think the Niners' resources are completely limited, kind of in that area to find something that can walk in and be better than Trey Lance or Brock Purdy, I would say probably not. I do think they have the ultimate quarterback deodorant in Shanahan that can make a lot of guys who are maybe not so good and not good look a lot better than they are. Just the way the offense is, the way how good he is, and all of that. Now, where I disagree with your homeowner's insurance is I would say, Larry, the San Francisco 49ers bought some expensive owner's insurance last year for Trey Lance, named Jimmy Garoppolo.
And they
That
needed it.
homeowner's insurance, they needed it. It didn't work. And then they had
Oh,
seventh
no, no,
round
no, no,
pick
no, no,
Brock
no.
Purdy.
It did work. They went to the
He got hurt too,
playoffs.
though. The homeowner's insurance got hurt too.
Yeah, but you
And
qualified for the playoffs, Vish.
seventh round pick Brock Purdy, Larry, fell out of heaven. And nobody would expect a seventh round pick to play the way Brock Purdy played, let alone a rookie quarterback. And he was outstanding and kind of bailed out their season. I don't know where we get to the point, Larry, where if we're talking about 3 quarterbacks, having 3 good quarterbacks is just hard. And that's where I kind of push back on this entire argument, because I'm unable to comprehend where the 49ers are going to find this third quarterback or how they're going to acquire him. I don't know whether it's money. I don't know where the picks are. I don't know how they're going to find him. If you're going to say draft another guy at the end of the draft, Larry, I would make the argument that you don't draft a lot of guys at the end of the draft that turn into Brock Purdy year 1 of starting. I say absolutely not. If we're going to talk about Brock Purdy and talk about how well he played, we can't just discredit him then by saying, well, if you draft Jake Haener, you draft this guy, he's going to turn into Brock Purdy, because that's simply not true. Not a lot of 7th round picks, let alone rookie quarterbacks, walk in and do what Brock Purdy did. So if we're going to talk about 3 quarterbacks, 4 quarterbacks, 5 quarterbacks deep, while I agree with you, Larry, find a way to get it competitive, compete. It's not about feelings. It's not about acquirance. It's not about opportunity cost. It's about making sure that you have the best guy playing quarterback for you week to week. We agree there. I'm unable to wrap my head around kind of where the 49ers can turn at this point, right? To find
But I mean,
something
let's
that
go
makes
back to
sense.
Garoppolo for a second. He
Okay,
started 10 games. They
right.
won 7 of those 10 games.
Yeah.
They wouldn't have. He started more games than the other 2 guys started combined. And he won 70. The team won 70% of those games. They don't go to the playoffs without Jimmy G. I mean, bringing back Jimmy G last year was a stroke of brilliance.
I agree with you.
The only thing that was more brilliant was drafting Brock in the draft, right? But I mean, because when you factor in the cost, but having Jimmy there was one of the best moves they made.
I agree with that.
And they wouldn't even been in the playoffs if they didn't have Jimmy G. Probably. I mean, maybe Brock could have stepped in early, but who knows if he would have lasted. Maybe he gets knocked out somewhere along the line. So he did kind of play some of his worst football at the end. Maybe he wore out a little bit. Maybe Greg Cosell feels like, he left some throws out there towards the end of the year. Maybe there was mental and physical fatigue by the end of the year. I'm just saying that Trey may be a star, maybe a bust. Brock may be a star. He may be a backup.
True.
I think we can say that. I think those are both true statements.
I agree.
And as far as the third guy, I'd like a guy who might be I'd like another Brock Purdy. He might be a star. He might be a backup.
Okay.
What I don't want is I want to bring in somebody who might be a star, but who I don't think is going to be a bust. I don't want to bring in a bust, but I want to bring in somebody I think has high upside potential. Especially because you've kind of already demonstrated how the Niners get in this peach of a position by drafting Brock Purdy in the 7th round. It was probably the best pick of any team in the entire draft. They got Brock Purdy, a starting quarterback, and they got him in the 7th round. So to me, do that again. You've shown the ability to handicap the quarterback market as well or better than others. Do it again. Go find out who you can trade for or who you can sign or who you can draft and go get the best guy you can get. I mean, that it's as simple as that. I think Trubisky is going to be available. I think Mariota could be available. I think there's a chance Zach Wilson could be available. I mean, I really, and then the free agent market has some older guys, it has some younger guys that look okay. It's not great. And then the quarterback rookie market's kind of speculative, but I definitely want at times during this regime, we've seen them say, well, we're going to go for this quarterback. And the idea like coming in, Hoyer, Bethard, that these guys were going to be backups. No more backups. Do not draft backups. Do not sign backups. Do not trade for backups. Trade for starters, draft starters, sign starters. And if they wind up backing up, they wind up backing up. That's the way I look at it. And so who would you go for? I would probably prioritize a trade for Marcus Mariota, but I'm really interested in Zach Wilson too. If that bridge has been burnt in New York, and I'd be willing to move a day 2 pick for a quarterback that I thought had some potential. Here's the other thing that the upside of this: maybe all these guys can play, right? We haven't even talked about that. Maybe Brock can play. Maybe Trey can play.
Right.
Well, the 49ers are going to be in a really, really good spot if that is the case. And they're going to be in a great spot if they trade for another young quarterback and can show that guy can play. Because the reality is like developing quarterbacks in a league where there's like 6 or 7 teams every year, maybe as many as 10 that don't have quarterbacks. I mean, the demand far outweighs the supply, and it's an annual occurrence. I cannot think of almost any time in the last 25 years where the actual crop of quarterbacks was deeper than the demand. The demand is always greater. So
Right.
You're Kyle Shanahan. You got an offense that works. You got some of the best weapons in football. Trade for a young quarterback or sign a young quarterback, develop them, find out who's the best guy in your room. And then after a year, pawn off the other one for a bevy of picks and continue to roll and build.
So
That's the way I would do it.
your underlying point essentially is that no matter what the 49ers do at quarterback, you want them to take a chance. You don't want them to just get a guy that we all know can't start, but can fill out the roster and isn't going to threaten Brock
Right.
Purdy or Trey Lance. You want them to get a guy that's talented enough that if we're in this situation again, that guy, if you do everything right and get that guy ready, he can play. Now, you keep suggesting Mariota, which
I love Mariota.
I just don't
you're
look
talking
at
about
Marcus
Brett
Mariota
Rippon.
as a starting quarterback in the NFL. You're right. Brett Rippon would fall into the category of he's not going to threaten Lance or Purdy. If we're talking your category,
I don't care about
I do think Mariota kind of becomes a part of this conversation. Green Glassful, by the way, appreciate the donation. He says, "Whoa, Vish coming in hot." Am I coming in hot, Larry? Are you
as
getting
far
me
as your
spicy?
mic? No,
I'm not
I don't think
exactly
so.
sure, but I also wanted to touch on one thing, Larry. Right, you talked a little bit about Greg Cosell's comment in between about Brock Purdy, and I want to pull up the comment, right, and it's the suggestion that the NFL had a book on Brock Purdy by the end of the year. Maybe his arm will never be the same. Blah 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 blah. Okay, so the second part of this, I agree with, right? His arm could never be the same. Trey Lance could definitely make a giant leap, and we're going to have to see that play out. Now, in terms of having the book on Brock Purdy and even what Cosell said, Larry, like, if you want me to be honest, and I think I mentioned it, right? I got some a little bit of pushback because I said I didn't think he played very well against Seattle, despite the stats looking as exceptional as they did. I do remember that at the time. But in general, Larry, if you want to say the guy passed up open throws, I'm not inclined to disagree. I can pull up the examples and show them to you. My kind of issue is somehow we have moved with Brock Purdy to this expectation, and we talk about him like he's Jimmy Garoppolo, where he's been in the NFL for 7 years, been in 2 different systems, played a lot of ball, and he's making those mistakes. Larry, I don't get it. He passed up a few throws. He didn't make the throw on time, on rhythm. A lot of rookies don't do that.
Right.
A lot of rookies don't do that. Stop
It's like,
telling me NFL
right.
figured him out. This happened.
I
This
know.
happened.
It's a bunch of
He's a
bullshit.
rookie quarterback who, on time, on rhythm, wasn't sure about letting the ball go. Oh my God. We should be more impressed with the lack of hesitation that he played with all of those other times for us to say this rather than just. I don't get that conversation, Larry. I don't even get it from Greg Cosell, who I respect so much and have learned so much from, where he's talking about the guy like he's Jimmy Garoppolo passing up open throws. What are you talking about? Every young quarterback I've seen play in the last 2 years has passed up so many open throws. It's part of the learning experience. So I know that this was a little bit away from what we were talking about, which is, hey, the quarterback injuries, where we kind of are, where you are on betting on talent over anything. Let's find a guy that's capable of starting and stash him in the back of the roster. But I did want to touch on this because you brought up the Cosell thing. But what the narratives with Brock Purdy are getting insane now. If we're going to talk about him like this, he was a rookie 7th round pick, for Christ's sake.
And I love Greg. I think Greg's a great guy. But let's not forget what Greg is. Greg is watching film and looking at scheme. He's not a personnel evaluator. He might have personnel evaluation thoughts, but if he was an awesome personnel evaluator, he wouldn't be sitting at NFL films. He'd be a personnel evaluator making a lot more money. He'd be somebody's pro personnel director or somebody's college personnel director. So let's not give people too much. I don't want to. That's not a knock on Greg. I'm sure people will run back to Greg Krueger was ripping. No, I'm not. I'm just saying it's a different skill set to be able to tell you why a play worked and to be able to roll tape back and forth in the schematics and understand coverage and then understanding personnel. I'm not saying that Greg doesn't have a great eye for it. I'm just saying, personnel evaluation is totally separate from what he does. So just remember that. And as far as there's errors of commission, and those are fumbles and interception, and then there's errors of omission. Do you know how many times Jimmy Garoppolo didn't see the field, didn't see a wide open guy? We're talking about 8-9 times a game. So are you telling me because Brock Purdy didn't let it go on some, basically it was, I saw the criticism. It really plays more like a compliment to Kyle Shanahan, that Kyle Shanahan had schemed open many throws and that Brock at times didn't pull the trigger and he's not sure exactly why. Well, there's any number of things that he could have been the reason why, but at the end of the day, all we have to go on is the record. And the record was that this rookie quarterback, this Mr. Irrelevant, this 23-year-old kid that everybody scoffed at me when I said he could play in July, this guy played well, and they didn't lose. And he threw 13 touchdowns, and he had 4 picks. And he went up against the Cowboys in the playoffs, and he didn't turn it over. And he went up against the Seahawks in the playoffs, and he didn't turn it over. And in fact, he threw for 330 yards plus and 3 touchdowns. So he has yet to turn it over. Basically, he had a sack in the sack against Philly, but no picks, and no losses in my mind. He got knocked out, but the guy, for a guy to be a rookie quarterback and a late draft pick, last pick in the draft, and he has 4 turnovers and undefeated in the regular season. He won you 2 playoff games, and you're going to critique him. We all should be as good. I would push back and say that none of the people that are critiquing him are as good at what they do as Brock is at what he does. So put that in your.
I don't even think it's that deep, though, Larry. I don't even think it's that deep. I think the criticisms of Purdy are completely valid. I just don't like the lens that they're getting painted in, For example, when we talk about criticisms with other young quarterbacks, right? We do preface it with, well, he was surrounded by this, or he didn't play this, or, he's still young and we think he has this potential. And, maybe you might not view Brock Purdy's ceiling to be that. And again, I want to repeat this. I very much respect Cosell's opinion. I learned a lot of football from him in particular, to be completely frank. It's just, I hate how it gets framed where you're all of a sudden talking about him like, yeah, he's passing up a few throws or he's missed a few throws. Like somehow the other quarterbacks on this team didn't do that. Like I watched Jimmy Garoppolo play for the 49ers the last 3 years. Every game. I've watched every game on film. Oh my God. To the number of times I've ran the play back and said, why didn't he throw the ball? Why didn't he throw the ball? Shanahan schemed him up wide open. Why didn't the guy throw the ball? And in fact, in terms of if we're comparing it, I actually said that less times with Brock Purdy, even though there are times you say that with Brock Purdy too, and you don't always know. And that's where I didn't mean to go off on our good friend here, Mark Pfeiffer, great friend of the show, always supportive, both here and on the Krug show. Excuse me, not the Krug channel, the Krug show, where you can find the Krug channel.
There you go.
But yeah, I saw this kind of going around, and I thought it was one, getting completely blown out of proportion, and two, I thought we were lacking complete context in how we talk about these quarterbacks and what we're saying about these quarterbacks. Like, yes, he passed up open throws. Yes, rookie quarterbacks pass up open throws. I don't know if it's necessarily an indictment. I think even with passing up those open throws, everything we've seen, Larry, indicates that, again, and now we have the big if with the surgery being delayed. But if he walks into camp healthy, Larry, he deserves to be the starting quarterback. Now, whether he continues to earn that job, whether he's healthy enough to keep that job, whether he plays well enough to keep that job, we will find out, Larry. But everything he has done in 2022 tells me that he should start as long as he's healthy, or he should start at the start of the season if he's healthy.
I mean, there's no doubt. I mean, come on. I mean, Brock Purdy only had 4 interceptions, and Jimmy had 4 interceptions. And, I don't know. Jimmy played some of the best ball of his career this year.
Right.
But it really just comes down to, seeing the field, executing the offense. There's things that Brock does that are just fundamental parts of Kyle's offense that he does better than Jimmy. The play action game from under center is a big part of Kyle's offense. The bootleg game, big part of Kyle's offense. The timing throws. This offense demands, it's a run heavy scheme that demands that you make efficient throws within the offense. The ball's got to come out with accuracy on time. And Brock Purdy's better at that than Jimmy Garoppolo. I mean, there's just no way around it. No doubt. Jimmy Garoppolo, to the point where Kyle won't even put him under center in play action, because when he turns his back on the defense and he turns back around, he needs a full second and a half to kind of reassess where everybody is. Brock makes the same play from under center, flips his back to the defense. When he turns around, he is ready to throw. He has an account of the defenders. He knows where his receivers are in their routes. And it looks more natural, So I'm not saying that Brock is a superstar. I'm just saying he's the best guy they got. And
Today.
Yeah, I think he's proven that he's the best quarterback they have, and maybe that will change. Maybe, here's the thing: he doesn't have a lot of fastball to lose. If he loses something off the fastball, and he could come back, and we're talking about 6 months, 9 months,
right?
It's really about, what does he look like when he comes back?
Right.
I don't care if he comes back in 5 months. If he can't throw and he's lost a lot of velocity, then he probably is a career backup. I don't care if he comes back in a year and a half, but he comes back and his arm is stronger than ever and makes all the throws, then he's maybe the franchise quarterback. But the injury complicates things, and I think this season should serve as a reminder that you go through quarterbacks. Another need for this team is offensive line, and as you said, it's hard to find good offensive linemen. So, bolster your O-line and keep whatever quarterback you have upright, but get 3 quarterbacks that you think you can win games with. Not 2 quarterbacks and a 37-year-old on his 19th team who's, everybody likes, but nobody has faith in. Not some super raw rookie who's going to wet the bed as soon as you put him in there and he can't play.
Right.
Get somebody who you think can play and put him into the competition. And what's the worst thing that could happen? The worst thing that can happen in this situation is Brock looks great. He comes back and is just as good as he was last year. Trey gets way better and shows franchise quarterback upside. And this third quarterback comes in and shows that, you know what? If those guys can't do it, you might be able to win it all with this guy. And to me, that's the way to go. I mean, think about Howie Roseman, who just, built, I think, the best roster in the NFL this year with the Philadelphia Eagles. He had Jalen Hurts. Jalen Hurts, a young, durable, tough young quarterback. He got Gardner Minshew behind him. And Minshew didn't make a lot of money. I think he made like $600,000, but he had a proven backup. Why? Because, having a good back, and they needed to lean on him down the stretch.
Right.
So, I mean, that's the approach I would take is go get a quarterback you like. And I like Mariota. I mean, I'm thinking, why do I like Mariota so much?
I'm thinking that too, Larry. I'm thinking that too.
93% against the Niners. The day against the Niners in Atlanta this year in October, middle of October, 13 of 14, 129 yards, 2 touchdowns, a 144 quarterback rating. It was his best game of the year. He also ran 60 times for 50 yards, 8.3 a carry, including a touchdown, had a 20-yard run. He's 6'4", 220. He's 29. For the season, he threw 15 touchdowns and 9 picks. If for whatever reason, if they don't want him in Atlanta, I would gladly take him in a trade.
Larry, I'm pulling up the film right now of the 15 throws that he made versus the 49ers. I have a good mind to play him, Larry. Those 15 throws, a lot of different quarterbacks were going 14 for 15, Larry.
I remember. No, I understand. But that, in a nutshell, is how the 49ers would win with Trey. It's a run-dominant offense that puts a ton of pressure on the defense on third down by utilizing Trey on the RPOs, either on the keeper or on the handoff, and hiding that mesh point. And that the exact scheme they ran at the Niners that day is exactly what Trey Lance potentially could be, and that's valuable. That's very valuable.
I won't disagree with you there. And Mariota is the third quarterback. As much as I sound like I don't like Mariota, which I do not think Marcus Mariota is a starting quarterback in the NFL. I don't know if that's going out on very much of a limb, but yeah, I don't think he's that or even close to it. But yeah, Mariota as a third quarterback would be an absolute steal. There's zero doubt about that. Are you kidding me? I would 100% embrace that idea. And, as much as I've said, Larry, I disagree with you. Larry, no. Larry, throughout this show, enough to at least for people to call me spicy, which, Larry, I might have to start doing this more because I like being called spicy. But as much as I've done that, I think you hit the nail on the head. The Niners are at a point where this quarterback situation, not knowing who the guy is or having the guy get injured, has affected basically 4 out of 4 seasons. And it's 4 out of 4 seasons where, we sat here on February 21st in every one of those seasons, except for possibly 2019, and said, we looked and we unfortunately were not doing this in front of all those seasons. But if we did, we would have looked at each other and said, we think that in each one of those seasons, the San Francisco 49ers are one of the top 5 teams with the opportunity to make the Super Bowl. We would have said it before 2020. We would have said it before 2021. And we certainly would have said it before 2022. And the fact that we've said it before all 3 of those seasons and the quarterback situation in some way or another has affected it, whether it's been poor play, whether it's been injuries. Garoppolo was banged up in 2021, poor play from Garoppolo in 19. And then now we're at the point of maximum uncertainty. I don't think we've ever had this much uncertainty heading to an offseason, given Lance is rehabbing and we have no clue what he is. Purdy is obviously going through a very serious procedure to his elbow. And then the rest of the quarterback room is blank. Given all of that, Larry, I think ultimately you're absolutely right. They have to take a chance. They can't look to thread the needle or not hurt anybody's ego or make sure that nobody discredits Lance or Purdy, because To be honest, Larry, it's cold. It's a cold-blooded business. This window is closing so fast. I know your fresh take is the 49ers are about to enter their next 4 to 5 years run. And as much as I think that's a possibility, Larry, it's also very much of a possibility. You know the old adage with the NFL, it's not for long. So many things change quickly in this league. And the 49ers have this special roster with this special core. They have, as Mike Florio likes to say, they have the most baddest dudes in the NFL, right? When you talk about the most superstars on a team, when you say Trent Williams, Deebo Samuel, Nick Bosa, Fred Warner, the Niners have more of those guys than anybody. The only difference is they don't have that guy at quarterback. Either he's always hurt, or he's this, or he's that, or he's this. You got to find a way to figure it out, and you got to maximize your chances to figure it out. Now, Lance could certainly be the guy. I'm not unopposed to the idea. I certainly am not writing that idea off. I think it's definitely a possibility. I think Purdy could be the guy. That's definitely a possibility. I think it's also a possibility neither guy can be the guy. It might be because of injury. It might be because of lack of talent, but some reason that's also a possibility. And I'm 100% with you, despite all of our disagreement earlier, that they have to take a chance if neither is the guy and hedge their bets on having another guy talented enough to be the guy. Because if you don't have the guy, now I'm just confusing myself. But if you don't have the guy, Larry, you should look at every avenue to find him.
We're focusing on a couple things. We're focusing on, is Brock going to be back in 6 months? Is Brock going to be back in 9 months? We're not focusing on the other major question is, when he comes back, what if he's diminished?
Right.
I mean, there's a buddy of mine who has scouted in the league a long time, and he says every quarterback that enters the NFL is in a race, and they don't even realize it yet. And the race is, can you learn what to do before you physically get your ass kicked and you're diminished, or you're just seeing ghosts like Rick Meyer or going way back Jim Everett? If a quarterback gets sacked a lot, he oftentimes loses confidence. So, how good, can you learn what you're doing before you're diminished physically? Well, Joe Burrow is a great example. He stepped in year one. They had a crappy offensive line. They went with Jamar Chase in the draft instead of Penei Sewell. And so they gave him a weapon, but they couldn't protect him. And he got destroyed, and he had a very, very serious injury. But he's still a franchise quarterback, and it didn't derail him. And now he's played in one Super Bowl and probably is going to play in multiple Super Bowls going forward. But it was still like he still had a crushing, a career-altering type injury. Now, Brock could have had a career-altering injury. We don't know. And Trey could have had a career-altering injury. We don't know. But we do know that Brock played at a high level when he did play, and that Trey's got great traits and has upside potential. But, we're talking about when's Brock coming back, but we don't know. What if he loses 20% of his arm, the zip on his fastball? Then he's not the same player, and he didn't have 20% to lose. So that's a problem. And maybe Trey is a great kid who loves football and the whole process is important to him, but maybe at the end of the day, he's just not all that accurate, and he doesn't throw a very catchable football, and he's not going to be a top tier quarterback. We don't know. They're all prospects. They need tutelage. They need development. So I would just kind of go forward with the idea yeah, it's possible I may have 2 franchise quarterbacks, but it's also possible I have none. And I can't, if I'm Kyle Shanahan, I got good job security, but I don't have endless job security. And if I'm John Lynch, I feel the same way. So I want that third guy to be able to play. And I'm not worried about people's feelings, and I ain't worried about competition, and I ain't worried about anything other than having 3 quarterbacks that can play. And yeah, it may be a little frosty around the room, and there may be guys that are kind of looking around going, hey, I'm the third string guy, I could start. So be it. I'm about myself and what I'm trying to build, and I'm not worried about them and their feelings. So I'm driving, whether it's Mariota or somebody else, I want somebody I feel like I can win games with, because I may have to win games with that person. So that's my stance. And the more I look at the options, the more I think the draft or the trade market's better than free agency.
Yeah, I think ultimately I actually agree with you on every single point. Unfortunately, I will lose my spicy reputation, but I think you summed up the 49ers offseason very, very well. And I think ultimately that should be their mindset, Larry. This quarterback situation, this drama with the quarterback situation, while it's been great content and it's been great conversation every single one of these off seasons, it's also been what's held this team back, Larry. If I asked you, Larry, why are the San Francisco 49ers not a Super Bowl champion between the years of 2019 and 2022? Now, it's a variety of different reasons in every single one of those years. But the simple answer I can give you is quarterback. Whether it's quarterback injury, whether it's lack of ability, whether it's poor play, the answer is quarterback. And they haven't figured it out yet. They
They
still
got to
need
be
to
more
figure it out.
desperate.
And I agree with you. That's where I agree with you. I'm glad you went to that desperation part because, Larry, I said this on your show a few days ago. I'm 98% sure a lot of people were unhappy that I said this, but I'm not 100% sure what they felt about me saying it, but I don't care what they felt about me saying it. This is the worst quarterback situation in terms of unknown they've had in the entire Shanahan era. At least in 17, we knew it wasn't going to be a good football team, and they were going to go with Brian Hoyer, who had experience under Shanahan. We knew who the guy would be. In 18, we thought it would be Garoppolo. He got hurt. In 19, we thought it would be Garoppolo. In 20, we thought it would be Garoppolo. In 21, we thought it would be Garoppolo and Lance. In 22, we thought it would be Lance. And now both of those guys are injured. I I'm with you. You have to be desperate. This team is so good. It's so close.
Well, not only
And
that, look at the conference. I mean, the 49ers are stacked. And they've got two rookie quarterbacks. The Eagles have a $50 million quarterback that's going to force them to dump a lot of their talent. They're the Niners' number one competition in the conference. If I told you, Vish, you're next year, I'm going to make you John Lynch. I'm going to give you John Lynch's job, but I'm going to give you $100 million if you win the Super Bowl next year, and you are fired if you don't. All right. You're gonna sit there and go, okay, look at our roster. Look at the NFC.
right.
How do you win the Super Bowl? First thing you got to do is you got to be in the Super Bowl to win the Super Bowl. That's one. How do you get to the Super Bowl? Well, you probably got to have the best record, so you're the one team that has the bye. But then I'm looking around the NFC and I'm going, guess what? The Eagles have cap problems. No other team is ready to run with us. The only way this team with the talent base that it has right now, and even just a reasonable draft, just a middle of the road off season, the only way this team is not in the NFC Championship game is if the quarterback position takes them out of it. Brock doesn't return. Trey is whatever. He's either
Right.
great and gets hurt or he's not good enough. And then they're sitting there with no quarterback again. So
Right.
if I'm sitting there, I think you need to go forward with your offseason with that level of desperation. I got to think all in on winning the Super Bowl next year. Kind of the way the
Right.
Rams were all in last year. Kind of the way the Eagles were all in this year. The Niners have to be all in. And the reality is there's probably only one way they don't make the conference title game. And that's if their quarterback situation is just not good. So instead of having two options and then we got two guys, but after that we're probably dead. How about three options or four options? How about draft somebody on day 3 you like, stash them on the practice squad? How about make a trade for somebody you like and bring them in the room? And the worst case scenario, you've got some guys that look good. I mean, let's say you brought in a Davis Mills, a Mariota, a Zach Wilson, a young ascending player. And let's say because Brock's out the entire, it sounds like Brock's going to be out the entire preseason. Let's say in the preseason, Trey plays great, but this other guy plays great. The Niners are in an absolute, perfect position. If Brock comes back and he looks money, you could trade one of those other two guys in October for future picks. You're in a really good position. So I would say the guy who you're going to get has to play in the preseason,
right.
most likely. So you're going to get a chance to showcase that player. And you got the best weapons, best collection of weapons in football.
And
so
the best scheme.
Go get
best
go get somebody, and maybe you can make a deal. I mean, on the worst case scenario, maybe you keep them all.
And I wish we could clip that right now, because I think you're so right about them being all in. And I hate, because, and I want to add this to it, because when you say what you said, Larry, and you said it, I want to pull up the comment. Tammy McDaniel was so kind to say Larry and Vish are spitting facts. We appreciate it. But he said something about he appreciates the honesty of this discussion. And I appreciate your honesty in how you described it, because I think you're absolutely right. And I think what connotation that often creates for people is, hey, that means Larry Krueger thinks Brock Purdy isn't going to be that guy, or Larry Krueger thinks that Trey Lance is going to be the guy. And that's not true, actually. The premise of this discussion is that both Larry and I just don't know. We think they could be the guy. We understand. We see all the reasons why they could be. But we also are saying that the 49ers, with this roster, with how good it is, have to be a point of desperation where they can't take the chance that they aren't. And whether that chance you think is 15%, 10%, 5%, that chance exists. And as long as that chance exists with this level of roster, the 49ers cannot afford to take that chance that either Trey Lance isn't what they hope that he would be, or Brock Purdy isn't what they think he's going to be. Now, they can still take their chance that both of those guys pan out. But in the case that either of those guys don't pan out, we don't know. The 49ers have to have some sort of contingency plan that is something. And I think, Larry, what you said is so important, because while acquiring that contingency plan, there has to be a level of desperation to not just acquire, Mr. Case Keenum of backup quarterbacks, or Chase Daniel of backup quarterbacks that's been a backup quarterback for 35 years, has zero chance of starting, and is a great locker room presence. You're saying they need to acquire the backup quarterback that has a chance, where you look at him, you say he's young ascending. Let's bring him into our system. Let's see what he does. And man, if we coach him right, if he puts it together, he's got also a chance to be a starter. I think that's such a good way to describe this offseason. That desperation at the quarterback position. And I'd also like to mention, Larry, I do think the 49ers in 5 years, and I can't compliment Shanahan and Lynch enough for this, because as much as they've mishandled the quarterback situation, they have been desperate every single season in how they've handled it, right? Trading up that much for Trey Lance before even knowing you're drafting Trey Lance a month before the draft, that's a desperation move, Larry. Trying to get Stafford, talking about Brady, talking about this guy, opening the door on Watson, talking about every available quarterback. Those are desperation decisions that say, hey, we don't have a top 5 quarterback. We've got to upgrade this. We've got to find a way. So they have handled it that way in every single one of these off seasons. And I think you're 100% right. They cannot get lax just because they have 2 young guys that have the opportunity to be the guy. They also have 2 young guys that have the opportunity to not be the guy. And they have to take the approach and continue to be as desperate as they've always been handling this quarterback situation. The worst case scenario here is that none of them is the guy. The best case scenario is, even if you are desperate and you get someone else, one of Purdy, one of Lance, one of these guys becomes the guy. And I think that as long as you hedge your bet enough, Larry, you just summed that up so beautifully. I think that's so
I think it could
right.
be summed up even better to say, what I'm really trying to say is no career backups, no guys that you suspect top out as backups. The third quarterback's got to be he's got to be a backup in name only, a guy who's backing up now, but he's not a backup. So that's kind of what I think. I think they need 3 starting quarterbacks. I've heard people say, like baseball wise, hey, the Giants have a gigantic outfield. At Oracle Park, they need 3 center fielders to accurately, or in a great way play good defense in their ballpark. Well, the same way that you may need 3 center fielders, I think the 49ers this year need 3 starting caliber quarterbacks, and then they need to have a competition, and then whoever loses that competition is going to be the next man up, And that's the way I would go about it. Especially if I really was going to lose my job at the end of the year and I was going to get $100 million if I won the Super Bowl, man, I think more than anything, this might be the most important thing they do in the entire offseason. Is more important than the draft, more important than who plays right tackle, more important than who replaces Javon Kinlaw, more important than does Jimmy Ward or Emmanuel Mosley come back. This move on this third quarterback might wind up being the biggest and most important move of their entire offseason. And I would treat it as such. And I'm looking for a starter and I'm looking for competition. And if Trey doesn't like it, if Brock doesn't like it, so be it. I mean, this is the way it's going down. I don't, in an ideal world, you wouldn't have this situation, but this is the situation. And, it's nut cutting time, man. There's no way to get around it. The Niners cannot. I guarantee you that Kyle Shanahan is loved by Jed York, but I also guarantee you that if Kyle walks into a meeting with Jed next February and says, Jed, the reason we fell short this year is the quarterback, Jed's going to roll his eyes probably and be like, he may start to point the finger at Kyle and John. So if I'm Kyle, that third guy's got to be somebody that I think's a substantial NFL quarterback who's got upside and can start for me this year. And, maybe even be the starter, be the guy if he has to be the guy.
So, Larry, I just want to take a couple of questions here because
Yeah.
I know we're a little bit near on your time. Before we take these questions, I do want to ask, Larry, you got a pretty special stream lined up. If you want to tell everybody where to find you in about 20 minutes on the Krug Show.
Well, we're going to try to get it going in 20 minutes, but my good buddy Dan Coach Emilio and Ryan Smith, Danny's been down in Giants Cactus League doing interviews on the, from spring training. And I'm not just a Niner guy. I'm a hardcore Giants guy too. So Danny and Ryan are going to join us, and then we're going to see some of Danny's interviews. I think he interviewed Kapler. He interviewed a number of guys. I think Conforto. And so they're like 3 to 5 minute interviews. They're short interviews. And so we're going to go live in a bit, hopefully 8:30, might be 9:00, but and play those interviews on our live stream coming up. So if you're a baseball head, not just a football fan, join us on the Krug Show and help us get to 15,000. By the way, Vish said we're closing. We're almost at 14,400. We're at 14,395 right now.
We got to stop taking this 1,000 by 1,000, Larry. Every single week we're just adding 1,000 to the number. Let's give it 20K. Let's set the goal of 20K for the Krug Show. By the way, a like and a subscribe here would also help.
Absolutely.
I appreciate it. The support. But Randall Riley was kind enough to donate, and this comment had me kind of confused for a second, but he clarified with the later on comment that, and apparently this is for the chat, so I'm going to read it for the chat. I've been unable to follow the conversation that's going on in the chat, but I have a vague idea of what's happening. And he says this 49er team sure doesn't know what they're doing.
No, he's saying this 49er team that doesn't know what they're doing sure does okay making it to the NFC Championship. Saying. So I hope they don't. I hope Randall's not saying that you and I are saying that.
So here's the next comment. He says, by the way, my comments were really for the chat, not you two. You guys rock. Well, Randall, now you're my favorite person. Wow. Thank you for telling me I rock, man. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, no, 100%. I think that in a lot of ways they do know what they're doing, and they're obviously doing a fantastic job. But there's this slight margin for error, right? Only 1 out of 32 gets the happiness at the end. And the 49ers have been so close now 3 out of 4 years. In fact, I would say 4 out of 4 years, because even that COVID year was really injuries. Otherwise, I feel like we would be having the same exact conversation. And that's where, Larry, desperation to me is the perfect word to describe this offseason. If there's a theme, Larry, that you and I feel like need to touch on, that need to constantly keep talking about, is that the 49ers should be desperate. Now, that doesn't mean they should be stupid. There's a difference between being desperate and being stupid. But that means they should be desperate in the sense that they got to know they're so close. Just a few things need to go right for them. And when they're that close, it doesn't mean run it right back. When you're that close, it means find every avenue, go through every single thing that might get you just there. And you were exactly right. The best summation of this third quarterback, given how the last 2 out of the last 3 seasons have gone for the 49ers, whether it's 2020 when all 3 quarterbacks played or last year when all 4 quarterbacks played, this third quarterback could define the season. He could be more important than the defensive tackle that I keep talking about. He could be more important than the right tackle when we got somewhat of a confirmation that McGlinchey is gone, and you and I planned to talk about it during the show, but then this Purdy news got us. So I think you're absolutely right, Larry. I always appreciate the time. I think I'm going to stick around for a couple more minutes and answer a few questions. I haven't done that in the chat in a while, but
that's always fun. Hey, let me throw this out too.
all right.
There, our buddy Kyle Posey, friend of the show, and good guy, has an article up, and I kind of did some of this stuff as well, and I actually did a video on Kyle's article. That's how good I think his article was. But he's basically got an article up saying at 3 potential signings, all within the division, all that come in the trenches, are 3 moves he'd like to see the Niners make. And I mean, I'll tell you, I don't agree with hardly anybody. It's like I've got my own thoughts. You and I sometimes agree, sometimes we don't. I mean, and that's the beauty of this thing. You know me, I'll give you the straight truth. If I agree with you, I don't fake agreeing. I actually agree. And if I disagree, it's not because it's personal. It's just because I disagree. But Kyle Posey wrote an article saying the Niners need to get real in the trenches. And he suggests Rodney Hudson from the Arizona Cardinals as a free agent center. He turns 34 in July. He's been hurt a lot. Yeah. But man, Rodney Hudson is a monster. If you have him in there. Then he's got Ashawn Robinson from the Rams. And he says, now I don't know that I would agree with this, but he says that Robinson wouldn't require more than a veteran minimum contract. I'll say this: if you can get Ashawn Robinson for a veteran minimum, man, that's like the first move I'm making. I thought he was the key guy that beat the 49ers in the NFC Championship loss to the Rams a year ago. I love Ashawn Robinson. He's 330 pounds. And he plays with a purpose. And I think it was Trent Williams and Ashawn that were mixing it up on the field when the Niners played the Rams earlier this year in the pregame. And then the third name he's got, I love as well. I've been talking about Colin Saunders. We've been talking a lot about David Onyemata, about the Deron Payne. He throws out Poona Ford.
Yes.
And I love Poona Ford, and I loved him at Texas. He's 5'11", 310. He's only 27. To me, he anchors better against the inside run than the guy that I was saying, Colin Saunders.
You said Poona Ford, though. I feel like we've done this defensive line dance.
I did throw him out as one of the names, but the more I read Kyle's reasoning, the more I like it. I mean, Vish, if the Niners can go get a quarterback, another quarterback to bolster their room, could sign those 3 guys and figure out something to do with Jimmy Ward in that secondary somehow, maybe the draft, maybe you re-sign Jimmy. I think they're good to go, man. I think they're good to go. I think the one takeaway from the championship game and the playoff run is that the Niners weren't they lost because they lost Purdy, but they weren't as good as the Eagles on the line of scrimmage. And so I would pour some money into the line of scrimmage. Poona, Hudson, Ashawn Robinson. Those are 3 great names. And if the Niners wind up with those 3 guys, I would be very confident that they are going to wind up in the Super Bowl next year.
So before you go real quick, I love that you brought that up, and it's a fantastic
I'd love to hear what you can chop it up with the chat and see what they think.
I think the latter 2 names are awesome in terms of Robinson. I'm with you. I'm not sure that he's a veteran minimum player. I thought he was pretty good this year too. In the little I watched him, yeah. And I think Poona Ford, in terms of if you're asking for a seamless, hey, we'll get a guy that's exactly what the 49ers are looking for good value, Poona Ford kind of checks every one of those boxes. I'm not 100% sold on the Rodney Hudson thing. In a vacuum, to me, it makes a lot of sense. But when you look at his age and his injury history and all of that, I just don't know. And to be honest, Larry, I feel like where Rodney Hudson is as a player what we've been able to see even the last 2 years in Arizona when he's been hurt and how bad line play, I wouldn't be surprised if Rodney Hudson has got another little bit of a payday, even if it's a 1 to 2 year payday. I wouldn't be surprised if he's got a little bit of a payday left in him. And I don't know if the Niners are necessarily in a position where you can take a chance with that much money on Rodney Hudson, if that makes sense.
You know what? I'll say this. I agree with you. I don't see the Niners going for Rodney Hudson. The Niners under Shanahan have used 5 different centers in his 6 seasons as head coach. I think Brendel's going to price himself out, and I think you'll see Poe or Zakel at center come week 1. That'll be my guess on center. I think they'll spend money on the tackle or draft capital on the tackle, but I think the center, even if they lose Brendel, I don't think they're going to spend big money.
Before you go, I now that you bring up that point, we got to end it with this because I've heard you mention this multiple times, and I think you need to say it one more time, not for the record because you've said it on the record so many times, but you're a big Nick Zakel fan. You think he's a starting caliber center, and do you think that he is capable of making that jump next year itself?
No doubt. He's smart, he's tough, he's physical, he's nasty. He's a big boy too. I mean, you're talking about one of the bigger bodied linemen the Niners have. 6'6", 316 pounds, probably has the ability to put on 5 or 10 pounds of muscle in the off season. I like Zakel a lot. I think he's a really good player. He's got when he locks. I mean, when you just watch him in drills, I mean, this guy likes to bring the punishment to the defense. And I think if they had to use him this year, he would have played and he would have played well. So if you ask me, what is the Niners line going to look like? I think it's Trent Williams, Aaron Banks, Nick Zakel, Spencer Burford, and a new right tackle. And it might be Jalen Moore. It wouldn't totally shock me if they tried to do something, if they brought in the Tom Compton
Right.
and they go Jalen Moore and they just kind of try to fill in.
You like Moore over McKivitz there?
What's that?
You like Moore over McKivitz there?
No, I like McKivitz. I like McKivitz over Moore.
I'm with you.
McKivitz, Moore,
I think McKivitz is actually a little bit underrated in the conversation here. And it's not that he's necessarily this overwhelmingly gifted right tackle. It's just from the standpoint where Larry, I thought, to me, you summed it up. The last time I talked with you, you summed up the 2 traits for offensive linemen that are so important: being smart and being tough. And I think he brings that in spades. And when you're talking about a league minimum player, he is a little bit better than that in the little time we've seen him start, for sure. He's tough, he's feisty, he's physical. I'm not going to be surprised if ultimately they try and bring in a few other options and none of those guys are able to replace or take the job from Colton McKivitz because of his familiarity with the system, his familiarity with the team, and his experience playing.
I agree. Yeah, no, I'm a big McKivitz fan. You got to remember this too. The Niners had a gold helmet designation on McKivitz coming out of West Virginia. That's their that's the same designation that Talanoa Hufanga had. That means they see special traits. I'll say this too, from just being in that locker room, every guy on that offense has total confidence in Colton McKivitz. So, that tells me something. I think he's really solid. I was a lot more nervous about the Niners offensive line, Vish, coming into last year's offseason than this year's offseason. Because now, whether you sign Brendel or not, he can play. He was a Pro Bowl alternate. Banks can play. He's young. Burford can play. I think Zakel, Jalen Moore, Colton McKivitz can play. I like Poe. They've got some offensive linemen there. So
do you have another minute, or can we continue this conversation? Yeah, I was going to say, can we go there? Like, what? What are we talking about? When we talk about young players and potential with the 49ers offensive line, are we not intrigued to see what Aaron Banks can do after getting the confidence he got this season going into the offseason, how much he can improve? Same with Spencer Burford. I 100% agree with that point. I've seen it so much. Oh my God, they need to upgrade their offensive line. Their offensive line was pretty good, especially when you compare it to the relative landscape of the league. They weren't Philadelphia, but Philadelphia also had one of the best offensive lines I've seen in the last 10, 15 years. So no team in a long time was Philadelphia. But yes, they were pretty good. And you're telling me that their second-year guard at left guard, who played pretty well, was very good in pass protection, played better as the year went on, is going to have another offseason under his belt and he's going to play better? Same with their right guard, who they were pulling in and out of the lineup to help him gain experience and all of that, and he's a rookie. Yes, Larry, I think that point is so important. We've talked so much about this player experience, this player growth, this player this, but we never apply that thing. We only apply, the idea of growth to players we like to talk about. Like, are you telling me Aaron Banks isn't going to grow after the 16, 17 games he just started? Same with Spencer Burford. I would say absolutely not. And I'm 100% with that point. I'm a lot more confident knowing what Banks is, knowing what Burford is, knowing that they can start in the NFL than I was going into last offseason when I was hoping they can start. Now I know they can. I'm not hoping.
Yeah. I mean, the Niners, one of the most significant additions this last year was they now know that they've got their guards for the next decade.
Right. Well, Larry, what a show. Really appreciate having you as always. We will be back. What are you thinking? Thursday or Friday on the Krug Show?
I'm thinking Thursday. I'm thinking Thursday this week, maybe
right.
Thursday evening.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah.
Well, we'll see you. Everybody, make sure you're subscribed to the Krug Show. That's the great Larry Krueger. He will be back next Tuesday. I will be back with him on Thursday. My God, I just had a Freudian slip and almost called it Saturday. Make sure you tune in to see Larry's stream about the Giants that's upcoming in a few minutes. I will keep it brief. I just want to take a few of your questions. I haven't done that in a while. But, Larry, I really appreciate you. Thank you.
Vish, have a good night, man. Good night to everybody.
That's the great Larry Krueger, everybody. So now we're back to the single screen. You get to see me all up close. I don't know if anybody wants this, but here I am. And so I just wanted to take a few of your questions here. I know that there's been a lot of really great questions in the chat the last few times we've streamed. I've been unable to get to them. And so I wanted to make sure that, we have a little bit of time today, and I wanted to talk about it. I know there's this incessant quarterback debate going on in the conversation in the chat over there. If you guys want to just continue that, I'm willing to sit content and watch it. But otherwise, if there's any questions, I would love to answer them and, talk about a few things here before we go for a couple of minutes. I'm scrolling through the chat right now. This quarterback debate is quite interesting, right? We got some Jalen Hurts in there. We got some Jimmy G. We got some Trey Lance. So Patrick Harris asked the $1 million question. Who is my first choice for quarterbacks to begin? And I called you Patrick Harris. My complete apologies. Patrick Herrick. Excuse me. I saw HRR and I just auto-corrected in my mind to Harris. Apologies for that. So I wish I had an answer for this question, to be honest. I know I just told you to ask questions. I said I could answer them. But to be honest, I think that a lot of this, to me, my first choice is going to depend on the mode that the 49ers choose to bring in the quarterback. So if you say trade, then my first choice changes. Whether you say draft, my first choice changes. You say free agency, my first choice changes. So it all depends on what medium the 49ers choose to acquire the quarterback. And then I think the best decision from there is a little bit different in all parts of those conversations. Gabe asks, do you think the 49ers move up into the first round of the draft? I say no. I don't think so. I don't think the 49ers are really a team that's necessarily, hey, if we go get this player, this is going to happen. Not necessarily. They've built up this really nice core. They've now paid almost all their young players, besides Nick Bosa, who's going to get the massive contract this offseason. They need to continue accumulating depth, getting these young players, developing them in their system. As now that we have highly paid Fred Warner, highly paid Trent Williams, highly paid Eric Armstead, highly paid Deebo Samuel, highly paid Nick Bosa, what we presume, and the Niners are going to start to lose a lot of these, really, really good depth players that they've had that have been starters that are underrated. And Azeez Al-Shaair, for example, or Charles Omenihu, for example. The only way you're replacing these kinds of players is with cheaper draft picks. And the 49ers have a lot of draft capital later in the draft. And to me, the best use of it is not to trade it up to go get one player. It's to continue picking all of these later round players that fit a system, continue drafting towards your philosophy, which they do very well, and develop. Their coaching is fantastic. Continue to rely on that and see, what type of starter level players you can pull out later in the draft. Mr. Angel 916 asks, what do you think of Purdy being advised that he should wait on his surgery till March? Well, Mr. Angel, I'm going to be a little bit shameless here, and I'm going to say this is what Larry and I talked about earlier in the video. There's a good probably 20-30 minute portion where we talk about all the different possibilities now that this surgery has been delayed. I would just implore you to go watch there. There's a lot of great insight there from the great Larry Krueger that would answer this question. So I'm going to, ask for the view a little bit shamelessly and say, go check it out. Randall Riley, good friend of the show, appreciate the support as always, says, what's your thoughts on Lance's quarterback one? He was starting this year. He got hurt. If Purdy doesn't exist, what's the argument against Lance now? The argument against Lance is the same argument that's always existed against him. But also the argument for Lance is also the same argument that's always existed for him. We are just another year down the road that we just don't know. We just don't know. And in a lot of ways, I think that unknown is a little bit more urgent now that you have a quarterback, you have a contract decision coming up on him at the end of this year on his 5th-year option. I don't necessarily know that there's an argument against him as much as, it's just the reality of the situation and the pressure of knowing that the guy hasn't played in 3 years and realizing the fact that you still don't know what he is. It's not that he can't be quarterback one. I'm not going to take that possibility out of the way. There is also just the reality of the unknown that makes you maybe have your doubts. But to be honest, I see a lot of people have very strong opinions on this one, both ways. I'm just waiting for the guy first to be fully recovered. Let's first make sure the ankle's okay. Then let's see him in practice. Let's see if he's playing well. And then let's kind of decide. We don't need to necessarily have this conversation and have a conclusion on this one today, though a lot of people are ready to make one right now. John Shoup says, in the draft, is your philosophy best player available, best player that fits a need, or best player when considering positional value? I actually tend to fall into the latter category. So the thing with the draft, and I've read so many different books with so many people talking about the philosophy of the draft and all of that. Bill Polian has his philosophy. Bill Parcells had his philosophy. Bill Walsh had his philosophy. So many great football minds that have, told us that this is what they do. This is their process. And the number one thing you learn from that is their process is all slightly different and that the draft in a lot of ways is a crapshoot. I ultimately fall into in the first round, best player when considering positional needs. So I used to think that really if you have a first round pick, if you have a top 15 pick, and Sean Payton said this year on the Herd, and I've heard Bill Parcells say it first. It's a Bill Parcells quote. If you have a top 15 pick, you always draft what is the prototype at that position. So every team usually has a list, right? Of if we draw up a right tackle on a piece of paper, these are the traits he should have. Parcells' philosophy was if you're spending a top 15 pick, that guy should check every box in terms of having every trait that you require that position to draft. Basically, you draft, the special athletes in the top 15 picks. I agree with that. But I also agree with the latter part that I used to think basically in the first round of the draft, a valuable pick is taking a quarterback, a left tackle, a corner, or a pass rusher. To me, those were the 4 premium positions in the sport. And that's the position you draft. Now, I added wide receiver to that conversation, but I still feel that way. I just think it changes round to round, though. I think later in the draft, it becomes best player available. But in a lot of ways, best player available becomes different for so many different teams because it's really best player that fits a need is your best player that's available. And I know I'm kind of rambling here and the answer is a little bit confusing, but ultimately my philosophy is this. If you're picking in the first round, you're picking in the top 15 picks, you draft the best player that fits a positional value, right? So one of those 5 premium positions to me. Later in the draft, you draft the best player available that fits a need. I think that's ultimately how you should approach it. But again, I've never drafted. I've been lucky enough never to have to draft. So I can just drop my philosophies on this and never actually have to test them out. Obviously, there's a lot changes when you actually have the pressure of drafting a pick and having to see that all play out. It's a lot easier to just, give a kind of opinion on it from where I'm sitting in my perspective. Yeah. Bernil Jacobs asks an interesting question. Is Greedy Williams an option at cornerback, and how do I feel about him? So I've not watched a lot of Greedy Williams since he came out of the draft. He's been a little banged up in Cleveland. In fact, I haven't watched a lot of Cleveland's defense besides watching Denzel Ward a little bit, maybe last year, because a lot of people were talking about how good Denzel Ward is, and boy, Denzel Ward is really, really good. But yeah, I've not watched a lot of Cleveland's defense. But if Greedy Williams is an option, for sure, I will make sure to do that and give you a better answer on this question, Brunio. Mitchell and Ness says, how do I feel about Mullins coming back? In a lot of ways, if you go listen to our early discussion, and I know you were in the chat, Mitchell and Ness, I think Mullins would, quote unquote, thread the needle of being the guy that doesn't challenge either Purdy or Lance, but in a pinch, I guess you could start him. But ultimately, I think Larry kind of summed up everything for me and kind of moved my thoughts to be in line with his, in the sense that I don't want the likes of Mullins coming back, because I know what Mullins is and I know how far you can ultimately go with Mullins and his talent, or in some cases lack thereof talent. Not that he isn't a talented football player, he is in the grand scheme of things. There's just certain things physically he lacks in terms of being a capable starting quarterback in the NFL. And so when you're talking about that, I'm not for it. I think ultimately, from a cost standpoint, in terms of having a backup, I guess it makes sense. He's familiar with the system. I think it does. But in terms of what Larry was talking about, right? In a pinch, does Nick Mullins have to play? And do you think you can consistently win games with Nick Mullins? That's one I turn my side eye to a little bit, Mitchell and Ness. Or I guess I turn my face. No, I turn my eye to create a side eye. I don't know. The description didn't really work there. Patrick Herrick says, do you think we can get offensive linemen or defensive linemen with our lower picks? I think you can get both. I do think the interior defensive lineman, right? This need that Larry and I especially have been talking about for so much time. Um, um, but I always feel like that interior lineman, right? This big run stopper, this Puna Ford type. Maybe Kalia Davis is that guy. We don't know. I think that guy is acquirable later in the draft in the 4th or 5th round. So I think that defensive lineman, if you're talking about, well, 5th, 6th round, what's more likely to get a starting caliber player, I would go with defensive line. I don't know if I correctly answered your question there, Patrick, but yes. Randall Riley and says, do you not have trust in Shanahan that he will start Lance because he believes Trey is their best chance at winning, not as some believe it's because where he was drafted? I think that Shanahan ultimately it's his responsibility to do that. Now, I do think this offseason kind of opening it up for Trey Lance and just naming him the starter had a lot to do with where he was drafted. That doesn't mean he didn't necessarily prove it to them and earn it that he should also be the starter, but it also had to do with the plan they had when he was drafted. I think both of those things are true. I think this conversation just becomes very tricky for me to talk about because I'm not in the building. I'm not watching Trey Lance in meetings. I don't know how Shanahan truly feels about Trey Lance. So it becomes a very, very difficult conversation to say, well, Shanahan thinks this, Trey Lance best chance of winning, all of that, because we're not really there for the details of this. And that's where this offseason is going to be mega frustrating, because there's going to be so much speculation on these type of things. And I'm going to be asked to speculate too. And I'm sure I'm going to be participating in the speculation. But to be honest, it's going to be hard to have a grasp of where any of these things are. Yeah, I know it's not a sufficient answer to your question, Randall, but it's hard to answer these type of questions at this point. But yeah, if there's any other questions, I think I can grab a couple more here before I hop off. Again, as always, guys, really appreciate the support. You guys are amazing. bring great content, great questions, make this so fun to do. Please like and subscribe and comment down below, what you think the Niners should do this offseason, what quarterback they should acquire, or what do you think is going to happen with Brock Purdy? And now that there's a delay in his surgery, it really helps the algorithm. It goes a long way into supporting me, and I really appreciate it. I think I'll take this question and actually, I'll take this question, then Daniel Valencia Backhoff's question, and then I think I'll call it. So Vlad the Impaler says, Vish, look at this. He had a rating of 95.2, 2,871 passing yards, 18-9 interception ratio, 67% completion percentage, and he was $3 million. Andy Dalton. So Larry and I touched on Dalton at the beginning. I think Dalton might be more expensive than what the 49ers are looking for, if I'm being honest. I think Dalton might be 6 to 7 to 8 million. Now, the 49ers can do a lot of different restructures to kind of figure out their cap situation. Whether they're willing to do those restructures is a completely different conversation. We'll see what they do ultimately and what they feel is the most prudent way to handle the cap. But in terms of where the cap is right now, Vlad is as appealing as an option as Andy Dalton seems. I do feel like he might be a little too expensive there. Exactly. Vlad, no issues at all. I can't expect you to pay attention to everything we say, especially me. I tend to ramble a lot, but definitely, I think, yeah, you're absolutely right. The way he played to me ultimately will do that. Angry guy called that. And Daniel, didn't forget about your question. I will get to it right here, right after this. He says, any juicy takes from draft eligible players you've scouted? Not necessarily yet, but I am pretty close to being done with quarterbacks. I do really like this quarterback class, by the way. I like Levis. I like Stroud in some ways. I haven't done Bryce Young yet. I'm not fully done with Stroud. I've watched some Richardson. I like Jaren Hall from BYU. I don't know if anybody likes him. I think he's got a chance to be a starter. There's a few guys in there that I like, and we're going to have full conversation, to be honest, about this on this channel right here. I'm going to have some people on who, I really appreciate their knowledge. They spend a lot of time doing it in terms of prepping for the draft and all of that. And I'm really excited for the conversation that's forthcoming about this. I really pulled up this comment, angry guy called Ed. A guy called Ed. Excuse me. I don't know why I'm having so many Freudian slips. I called you angry 2 times. Apologies for that. A guy called Ed. I really pulled this comment up to preview that. I know it's a little shameless again there, but it's the case. So stay tuned, because there's going to be a lot of takes from this channel coming about the quarterbacks. We'll talk running backs. We'll talk receivers. I think we'll talk corners, maybe safeties. But yeah, that we will do a lot of talking about draft, and we'll have a lot of really, really cool and smart people on this channel to break it all down. But I want to go back to Daniel's question and ultimately call it here. Mitchell and Ness says I must be angry today. Yeah. Maybe I am angry because I just called a guy called that angry. But Daniel says, Vish, with our current cap situation, do you think we can get a splash free agent signing? And I do think so. Yeah. I think that if I was to restructure a contract, if I was the 49ers, I think Trent Williams and Eric Armstead are probably the 2 prime candidates on the 2 contracts I would touch. But yeah, ultimately, I think if they do that, I think they're going to get one big bite at the apple again. And I'm intrigued to see what position they think is going to be worth it in terms of that one big bite at the apple. Last year, they thought it was corner, and they went and got themselves a premium #1 corner in Charvarius Mooney-Ward, who played like a top 10 corner throughout the football season. Other than tough game versus Seattle, really at the end of the year, Mooney-Ward was awesome. No doubt about it. They got that. And John Shoop touched on it. That's the name for me. If we're going to say, well, hey, the Niners have one big bite at the apple, it's 28-year-old Yannick Ngakoue. I was a big proponent of Von Miller last offseason. I said 49ers feel one kind of player away. Von Miller would be that game-changing player. In a lot of ways, he would have been, but he got hurt. Yannick Ngakoue, to me, in terms of a speed rusher on the other side of Bosa, a guy who complements Bosa's skill set, a guy who's consistently rushed the passer well, no matter what location he's been in, a guy who fits the scheme, that's the name for me. If they get one big bite at the apple, If they're going to spend some money on somebody, I would say Yannick Ngakoue. That's the guy. We'll see what position the 49ers truly want to spend it, but to me, that's the game changer. Go get that special edge rusher on the other side of Bosa. I don't know if I would call Ngakoue necessarily special, but you put him on the other side of Bosa. Bosa and Ngakoue to me is a top 3 or 4 edge rush duo in the sport. What we're talking Watt Bosa, or not, excuse me, Watt Highsmith, Bosa Mac, Ngakoue Bosa. Am I missing anybody? Zadarius Smith, Daniil Hunter, maybe if Smith goes back. So yeah, I think that would be the name, Daniel. But everybody, I really appreciate the support. This was really fun. Shout out to Larry Krueger for joining us. This was great. As always, please like, subscribe, comment down below. It helps the algorithm out. I will be back later this week. Stay tuned to my YouTube community tab. I will be posting when I do stream. It all really just depends on where I am with my draft stuff. If I can get a lot done tonight, a lot done tomorrow, early morning, a little bit more done later, I think it would help a lot in terms of where the streaming schedule is. But that's kind of where I'm at. Before we go, the Beast Hider asks, "You ever smoke weed?" No, that's not really what I do. But I appreciate you donating and asking me that. But no, not really. Not really what I do. But again, appreciate the donation. But again, everybody appreciate the support. And I will be back next time. Thank you.